Hey, good to be talking to you today. Needless to say, there's a lot going on out here in D.C. We're getting at the conclusion of the public version of the impeachment inquiry. I probably had more input and comments on becoming the first Republican to join the climate caucus. Still, things like health care reform are being discussed. Sadly, not much of that is getting moved along the pipeline of getting it to the floor to vote on. So a lot of stuff to talk about. I think that once we do get through wherever the impeachment inquiry leads us, that we will get back on track. But the way I'm measuring it, it's probably going to cost us 3 to 4 months, which means everything gets pushed further and further down the line. So looking forward to answer any of your questions.
From WSBT. Oh, pardon me.
Sorry, Bob. We got a list as they join the call, but if we can keep it to we follow up. We've got a lot of outlets on the call, and we've got until 10. Senator Braun's got to leave. So we had Bill first with Wish TV. Go ahead.
Senator, this is Phil Sanchez, Wish TV. How are you? Thank you for taking some time.
No problem.
You said yesterday, or at least earlier in the week, you said that you were in support of the president. After watching the testimony over the past few days, do you still feel the same? And if so, why?
I do, because when I look at this, it's a political process, number one. I look at the origin of when it started, and to me it started back in November of 2016 when there were so many clips of wanting to find a way to impeach the president before he had any chance to, even get going. And I think that the Mueller report was the main vehicle. All that time and energy was spent, and it ended up kind of in a flop as a dud. I think there was another effort, and that's what we're seeing right now, to latch on to something else. And when it comes to finding a reason to do it, I think that's part of politics. I just don't think in most cases, for most presidents, there was the interest in doing it before you even had a chance to start serving. So I look at that. I look at the process, to me, has had questions along the way, but more particularly just what we've seen in the last few days, the public presentation of the argument that was being leaked out, when all this was done behind closed doors. There's no new revelations. We knew most of this, and I really believe this was the effort to see if you could focus group the public into getting behind the process. And that's got to be disappointing for the ones that have been pushing this agenda from November of 16. Public support peaked 3-4 weeks ago. And in fact, it's starting to turn against the folks focusing on impeachment inquiry. Look at the recent poll in Wisconsin, a swing state. And I think we've seen that in many other places. And the behavior, pushing the envelope, which is maybe part of parcel of having a president like President Trump, you can have your opinion of that. To me, when you go drill down into the question that was asked of every witness, was there an impeachable moment? Did you actually hear the president say all the things that you would need for this to actually be a case has not occurred? And I think that when we're done today, you're going to see this thing, just like Nancy Pelosi was wavering on Face the Nation. I think hedging her bets, will we even get an article of impeachment? And if we do, I think the case, once it comes to the Senate, will even be fleshed out more to see that there's nothing there. Regardless of what you think about President Trump's style, whether it was appropriate or not, that this is, like Nikki Haley said, the death sentence for a judge or a president when you're going through impeachment, and nothing has risen to that level.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator.
Kayla Sullivan, Fox 59.
Hi, Senator. I actually have a question about some breaking news that happened here in Terre Haute in the state. Executions that were set to happen at the federal penitentiary in Terre Haute are now on hold after an order filed by a U.S. district judge. Would you be able to comment on this ruling?
I did not know that until you just brought it up. Did that occur here in the last day or so, or when did it happen?
It just happened today.
Yes, so whenever it comes to what the underlying reason was, I'm going to always be interested in making sure that if there's some additional information or evidence that would delay or even stop an execution, that should always be given its full course. To me, there wouldn't be a thing more sad to where somebody is executed and it's based upon evidence that should turn the case around. So I don't know the particulars of it, but if it was stayed, I'm going to generally be always in favor of that to make sure you're absolutely sure about the underlying case before you'd move forward with something like an execution.
Did you say we get follow-up questions as well? Or?
Yeah, you can ask one, sure.
I wanted to follow up to the impeachment inquiry. Are you insinuating that some of these witnesses are lying when you say that this is entirely political?
No, I'm saying that all the witnesses, I believe, are giving their opinion, their interpretation, and I think when you put it all together, I look at questions like, do you think this is an impeachable offense? Did the president actually say there was a quid pro quo? And I think across the board, you're hearing the interpretation of what happened, but when you ask those critical questions, which ought to be really where the rubber meets the road, that isn't happening. So no, the witnesses, the only thing I think is that we've been restricted in terms of the counter witnesses. I think the Republicans were able to get maybe 3 of the 12 that they had requested. Of course, if it comes over to the Senate with a particular article of impeachment or 2 or whatever happens, that will be fully addressed because it'll be a trial different from an impeachment.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Brian Francisco with Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette.
Hi, Brian.
If the House does vote to impeach the president, and he will be tried by the Senate, you and some other Senate Republicans have said they believe the president has done nothing wrong, just as some Senate Democrats have said he should be impeached. Shouldn't senators from both parties withhold their opinions until they have the opportunity to formally hear testimony and review the evidence?
Well, I think, Brian, that would be on what we've seen cumulatively. And I think that if there is further evidence that would come forward, either exculpatory or blaming the president with a closer connection, you got to be open to that. All I'm saying is it's funny how you can see the same stuff and have 2 different opinions currently, but that's the political element that enters into it. But I would reserve, if we don't see anything other than what we've seen so far, unless there would be something revelational that comes into the trial itself, I think that would be the opinion of most of my Republican cohorts. And I don't, I guess, blame the other side for viewing it differently, but I think when it comes to Nikki Haley, like I mentioned earlier, I think really put the right edge on this. Impeachment is the death sentence politically for a judge or any official serving in government. And I think you got to be very careful there, especially in light of the fact that we got an election coming up in less than a year now. And to me, so far, with the evidence that's been seen, that's where the judge and jury should sit, and we'll find out in November of 2020.
But I guess what I'm saying is, shouldn't in court cases, a juror who expresses his opinion about the case would be excluded from the jury, whereas both in the House and the Senate, members of Congress have no qualms about stating whether they think the president is guilty or not.
And
I'm just wondering,
yeah.
how can there be a fair and impartial hearing on this matter?
Because this is a political situation. It's not doesn't have the same technicalities that would underlie sequestering a jury or being able to eliminate a juror that's got a predetermined point of view. That's why impeachment is different, because it's inherently political. And when it comes to the trial itself, should we get an article of impeachment, I think there'll be a little bit more focusing in on what you're talking about, but it's still the culmination of a political process, and it is different from what happens in any other court of law.
All right. And Bob with WSBT, then we'll go to WNDU, and then over to Fort Wayne.
Senator, hi. I was listening to your answer here. Is there anything you have heard to this point that gives you pause? Do you feel like there's any veracity at all to what you're hearing that should be cause for concern?
Well, I think if you wanted to be careful and not even be in this position, there probably would have been no conversation whatsoever. But when you look at it from the president's point of view, and you look at a place like Ukraine that has had corruption built into, how it's governed, for years, and then you throw the Russian kind of variable in there and its juxtaposition to the Ukraine. It's got a lot of different elements there that, yes, I think that probably all of this would have been prevented had there been nothing mentioned. But on the other hand, if you look at if it was focused on the 2016 election in Burisma, and every witness other than their interpretation of it has also said there was no direct mention of the Bidens. So I think that anytime you do push the envelope, you've got to be careful, because you're going to have consequences, especially in this day and age of where everything gets analyzed with such a fine-tooth comb. And I think that, again, is part of a style of a president that maybe isn't as careful politically as what he needs to be. And you do go through these kinds of situations, and it's in the format now that's playing itself out.
And quick follow-up question on that. Are you concerned about any kind of concurrent running at the same time foreign strategy dealing with Ukraine when you deal with Rudy Giuliani handling one side and the official government position on the other side, and they don't always mesh? Would you advise the president to continue on that course, whether it's Ukraine or any other country?
What I'd advise the president to do is any of this that we're seeing, which has got himself into the predicament of an impeachment inquiry, is that I would modify that because as much as I ran as an outsider and a disruptor, because the place needs it. Believe me, now that I've been here 10 and a half months, the institution is less healthy than I even imagined. So it needed a dose of reform, of being shaken up. For the president to make it through this next year and get reelected, there's so many good things on the agenda that are working that we can't talk about. There's so many things we've got working in terms of reforming health care. And my advice would be, when we do get through this, let's emphasize policy, what's working, keep out of being embroiled in things that are political, because it's that toxic an atmosphere here. And really, to be honest, I think it goes both ways. The place has gotten so polarized when it comes to Democrat or Republican. It's like the Hatfields and McCoys. I think you'd be wise to stay out of trouble or kind of a investigation in the first place.
All right. Thanks, Bob. WNDU and then Fox 55 and WPTAF.
Yes, Ibrahim Samar, WNDU. Senator, do you believe, mentioning that it is toxic, it's become a toxic environment, do you believe that there is a reasonable resolve between Democrats and Republicans who have a difference of opinion regarding this impeachment process?
When you're talking about the impeachment process particularly, or in general out here on other policy?
specifically?
So no, I think we are in the final stage of what's going to occur before they're going to have to take a vote on do they come up with an article of impeachment. I'll refer to what I said earlier. I think that the process was driven too aggressively by probably the left wing of the Democratic Party, and when public support peaked basically at the approval ratings that have been in place for the Trump presidency to date, I think they were worried. How do you get it to the next level? And they're making their best case, because if this doesn't get beyond 50%, especially now that it's ebbing, I don't know that they'll go forward with an article of impeachment. And if they do, it'll only be to save face because they put this much time and effort into it. So no, I don't think that we're going to see any dynamic change from this point forward because it's too baked into the system.
Thanks, Senator.
All right. And Fox 55, and then WPTA, WTWO, and then over to IPB. Fox 55.
And with this impeachment inquiry happening so close to an election, is it worth the time? Because then the American people will have a say next year whether or not the president will stay in office.
That's a great question because, again, this is a political process, and that is a political question. So if you look at the things I would measure to see how this pans out into 2020 is most of the swing states have never gotten to the level that the national polls have in the first place. Refer to a poll taken yesterday or the day before at Marquette in a swing state, which shows that especially among independents, it has really flipped over the last 3 weeks to where it's going the other way. And that will be, I think, what determines how this thing is played out. And yes, when you're this close to an election, when it couldn't even in a national poll get beyond 50% in public support, when you're looking at what's going to determine who the next president is, it'll be the swing states, 8 to 10 states. And all of the polling, especially among independents, says, let's do this at the ballot box in 2020. And the one thing that Speaker Pelosi is pretty good at is reading the political tea leaves. So it'll be interesting to see what she wants to do.
Okay. And WPTA, you're on. WPTA, are you on?
Hello, hi. Yep, my name is Jaslyn Beba. I'm here with WPTA. So, Senator, we were wondering, do you have any concerns that Sondland testified that Pence was in the loop regarding the Ukraine situation?
Well, and I think he also intimated that Pompeo and others were as well, especially Giuliani. And all of that gives me pause, and that's all part of the danger when you enter into a dynamic like this anyway. But I think since the case itself is having trouble getting over the threshold, and like I said earlier, is starting to go the other way, I think that lessens whatever discussion you might have on other players that are part of the equation. So I think you're kind of all in it together. Whether Sondland's references to Vice President Pence, Mike Pompeo, and others, I think that'll boil down to what you think of Sondland as a witness in the first place, where he's had a little variability in change of his message as this thing is, moved forward. So, yeah, that's an area of concern. But in this case, I think it's going to go along with the dynamic of where the proceedings go anyway. And to me, it looks like it'd be assuaging, it'd be getting to where they're probably less in danger of being drawn into it.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
WTWO, and then we'll go over to Brandon.
Yeah, hi, Senator. Going back to the federal execution halt today, President Trump has been quoted to say in the past that he thinks that capital punishment is an effective deterrent. What is your response to that and your thoughts on federal execution in general?
Did you say effective or ineffective?
An effective deterrent.
Yes.
So he thinks it's effective.
Yeah. So I think that the death penalty, even though I have some concerns with it from maybe a moral or religious point of view, when it comes to a legal tool, I think it has to be out there. It's hard on an issue like that to say you're 100% one way or the other. But I agree with President Trump that, and I would qualify that by saying in certain cases for certain crimes. And I think a lot of that would, in my mind, have to have some latitude among states as well. But in general, I'm probably going to be in that camp that says be careful with it, use it as seldom as you can, but you can't take it off the table.
All right, thanks, Senator.
Thank you. And we'll go to Brandon next. Is there any other outlets that have joined that haven't gotten a chance to get? Okay, Brandon.
Yeah, WEHT in Evansville as well.
Okay, perfect. We'll get to you after Brandon. We got about 5 minutes left. Brandon, go ahead.
I'm actually going to have my colleague Justin Hicks ask his question.
Beautiful.
Hey there. So I'll take the question for IPBS. Justin Hicks here.
Hi, Justin.
Senator, this may be a welcome change or a total curveball, but this has nothing to do with the impeachment inquiry.
Wow.
I've been looking into federal workforce funding, and how that's been declining over the past decade, especially with WIOA funds being kind of cut gradually here and there. And it looks in the 2020 budget, it's being cut by about $200 million more. Anything that we can do on the federal level, because I know our work ones here in Indiana are sort of getting creative. They're having to be pretty creative with funding cuts. So anything we can do on the federal level here?
It's a great question for more than just as it applies to workforce. The place out here is running a structural $1 trillion deficit. That's along with the $23 trillion in debt that we've amassed. And again, our budget is roughly $4.3 trillion. So imagine losing in any business almost 20% or even a little more on your P&L. So I wouldn't look to the federal government, and I tell everyone that comes here, many Hoosiers that have programs that are dependent on the place. I don't see that it's going to change drastically in the next few years, but unless we get the underlying issues fixed to where we live like we do in Indiana, where you don't laugh at rainy day funds and balanced budgets, I would be worried about any program, whether it relates to workforce, healthcare. Was just talking to a group of obstetricians here earlier today that want the government here to weigh in on things to help them. I think it's a questionable business partner. So I think states need to start to get the message that unless you want all the costs, all the bureaucracy, and also the dependence on a financial partner that is certainly not knocking it out of the park, is running because we're willing to borrow money from our kids and our grandkids, I'd look to do things more on our own. And that's what I loved about being a state legislator. When we passed a long-term road and bridge funding plan that asks cities and counties to have some skin in the game, that's the way we fix it in the long run. If we keep wanting to ask more and more of a broken institution, I would hedge my bets.
Okay, appreciate it. And
Can I just follow up on that real quickly?
Yeah, it'll have to be real quick. We have about 2 minutes left.
Yeah,
so another outlet.
No, sorry. That's fine. I just wanted to point out, though, Senator, that the Work One centers, the one-stop centers, are actually federally mandated to exist. Like, that comes from the federal government. They have to exist. So
yeah.
I'm just not sure how that would work.
Well,
but
and that even is worse, because if it's totally dependent and it's a program that's working, that funding will be in jeopardy. That's why you're seeing the potential cut in it currently. My prediction is that cut probably won't take place to the extent you're talking about, simply because the way it works currently is Democrats roll over for Republicans for defense. Republicans roll over for Democrats on any domestic spending. That's why it went up 7 to 8% last year, largely driven by entitlements, Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. So there's often talk of doing the things you need to do. Probably won't happen until we get into some type of crisis. So I would question whether that's going to actually materialize. In the long run, though, you should look at other alternatives because it will materialize out of necessity.
Okay, appreciate it. And WEHT, you're on.
Yeah, hey, Senator Jake Boswell with WEHT down in Evansville, Indiana, and this question is specific to this part of the state. Right now, there's a lot of controversy over the possibility of windmills coming to Posey County and Gibson County, something that's up near the northern part of the state. Obviously, it's a change in energy efficiency and the way the energy could run in this part of the state. Where do you stand as far as the state's changing when it comes to energy and the possibility of adding maybe more wind power to the state, especially in the southern part of the state?
It's a great question in general. Of course, I was the first Republican to join the Climate Caucus. Republicans and conservatives are by nature foot draggers on getting engaged in an issue. That happened in healthcare, and that's how we got Obamacare, because we didn't acknowledge that the healthcare system is broken. On the energy front, I'm a believer, along with being careful to take care of the climate and the environment, that we need to embrace many different ways, and in the long run, it'll be the least expensive and the cleanest fuel, especially for electric generation. When it comes to windmills, when I was campaigning along Tippecanoe and Benton counties, you've got a lot of wind power. In many counties to the east, I saw many signs that said no windmills. So I believe in this case, it should solely be the discretion of the local jurisdiction, the county that weighs in most significantly, and there that they reflect what the citizens of the area. I actually talked to a few of the farmers that might be part of that, and that'll always be an issue when you're taking ground that can be used for other reasons. You need to be near transmission lines, but we will sort that out in the long run. And when it particularly comes to an issue like that, I would hope that the local jurisdiction has sway and there's no mandate from a higher authority.
All right. We are out of time, so that'll have to do it. But thank you for everybody for joining, and we'll follow up with the full clip, to everybody as soon as possible. If you don't receive it by like noon or so, reach out to us, and we'll get it to you. Thank you.